Si je sais, j'habite au Canada.
はい。야이
Tosh,
해tar이요소.
Alushin, Poyosa Yosif, Wallender, Servo, Xenanojem, Yos, Si je sais, j'habite au Canada.
So welcome back. I wanted to share something I believe I've shared before, and how do you call this? It's if you're curious about how to, you can say, spread fluency. And for those who are in language acquisition, who've chosen to take this path towards being natural, especially if you're awakening, there's a way to be a catalyst for such, I wouldn't say change, catalyst for revitalization of communication, or rebirth of communication. Kind of going back, but at the same time having this rebirth of this whole thing. And that's one of those things is, of course, you can, because anybody can actually be a language teacher. It's actually very, very easy. But a lot of people, the conditioned state we've been for thousands of years, always breaking things down so that we understand it because of the limitations of this form, right? That's just the way it is. Some of us take it, chunk load first, more than others. Some of us can carry more of the information or the experience faster or more, But that goes the same for other people who understand things much faster than I do. It's like, boop, they just got it. Because they understand it. We're not just talking about language itself, talking about general understanding. So, but you can be a language teacher by looking at, first of all, usually when you think of teacher, right away people think about, I have to have a credential because they're afraid of imposter syndrome. I have to have a structure. I have to have this. I think it comes down to honing your intuition and just honing your intuition, your patience. If it's meditating that helps you, if it's yoga, it's exercise or working out, or any of the above, cold showers, whatever it is. The key is always being open. Key is always allowing, or, well, for some might be extreme, surrendering. So, for example, you come across someone, they don't speak your language. What do you say first? Is it really about teaching that you focus on? Because usually teaching has this egoic tinge of flavor to it, as if it's like we have to be right, we have to be correct, I have to be in that, I have to be this, I have to be this. Should is not healthy, right? Because it invalidates what you can do at the moment. It invalidates what your abilities are at the given moment. And when you're invalidating yourself, or others are invalidating you, or both, it actually affects you on a subconscious level. Emotions, get affected by it. And this is probably why some people don't understand why they're like, I'm getting what do you call that? What do you call this? Panic attacks. Or even if it's not panic attacks, I don't know, something like that. There's a connection with everything. Everything is connected. It's really what it is. Everything is connected. So, being that everything is connected, we have to look at, first of all, even if you're just like plain looking at a person from the point of view of actual like teaching, classroom, blackboard, okay, this way. So I still have a blackboard here. That's why I'm laughing. I'm laughing at myself. There's a blackboard here. Whiteboard, rather. And so the key is to you want to communicate, right? One simple thing is to, first of all, okay, the first one was yes, be open to it. You have to be open to any changes. Get out of your own way. Get out of your own fucking way. Get out. Just allow for it to be like, okay, so they don't understand you. What happens when you talk to someone and you say, how are you? And they're just like hearing what's happening. Put yourself in their shoes. That's another thing. Number 2. Right? So 1, being open to it. I'm going to write this down for you guys. Okay. Number 2, compassion. But you can't really have compassion, or maybe that's not the right word for that one. Try to be, at the very least, sympathetic or empathetic. That if you put yourself in their shoes, how are you going to react with somebody who's like, wah, wah, wah? This is why in Charlie Brown, for those who have seen Charlie Brown, this is why Charlie Brown would always think the teacher's going, wah, 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 because all he's hearing is sounds. He's not hearing the connection. And what I mean by connection is it's not even just connection. If you look at the most basic fundamental root of understanding or comprehension, when we see things with our eyes, let's say you go to a new country, right? Not a lick of the language that you know of, nothing. Not a culture, nothing. You were just dropped off in the middle of nowhere. Maybe it's another country, maybe it's a deserted island, I don't know. And then there's like headhunters there. So how do you communicate with those people? Do you just blab about this is what I'm saying? Because we insist that the ego wants to be right. The ego wants to preserve its ways. The ego wants to say, well, I don't know how to do hand movements. That's where that whole getting out of the way is. Right? Okay, so get out of your own way. Again, then going back to that compassion thing, or rather that sympathy thing. If you were in their shoes, how would you feel? If you were in their shoes, you don't understand what the other person's saying. All you're hearing is sounds. The reason why hand movements work, the reason why it facilitates in comprehension, is because it's recognized by the subconscious. The subconscious understands, or the subconscious area of the brain, even further down, the reptilian brain. Who the fuck cares if there's a research and there's no proof behind it? I don't fucking care. It works. For me, at least it works. If it doesn't work for you, go ahead. Whatever. Do what you want. For me, it works. When I watch something and I hardly get any visual cues, like they're just going, ba, 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 I start to get fucking bored out of my skull. Because I'm not understanding it. I'm not connecting. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. There's no flow. They're just going bop bop bop. It's like trying to. It's like saying that. How do you call this? I suppose an analogy for that would be if you are, let's say, you created your own writing system, your own symbols. Nobody else knows it but you. How are you going to communicate that to others if that's what you want in writing? Or even if you created like symbols, like things, like to represent your thing. If they're not recognizing what that symbol is, they're not going to understand it. This is what Krashen calls comprehensible input. If they don't understand it, they're not going to understand it. You get what I'm saying? If they're not understanding it, they're not going to understand it. Well, first of all, it's not even going to really be understood until all of the senses, all of your self gets included in the whole process. Because all of us have a fragmented aspect of ourselves that understand this thing, and then this thing, and then this thing. Whether you're looking at it from the multiple intelligence theory perspective, or astrology, or this, or that, or this, or that. It's the same thing. All of it's the same thing. There are people who have stronger skills by doing. And it's actually a combination. But the point is, there are certain strengths that we have that other people don't have. But they also have their own strengths, because we're all born with a unique signature, with a unique energy. Just like the tree, the branches of the tree, or the roots of the tree, and everything. It's different. Its uniqueness spreads apart. It's part of fragmentation. But what makes us even more what makes us actually fragmented is the idea that the separation is the reality. It's not. So how this ties into this whole thing is that we believe that we are separate from another person because we assume that what their world has to be our world. We think that it's like, wasn't that unity? Isn't that uniformity? When we think that they're our world. Well, think about it. Is your own reality their reality? Is your perception their perception? That actually is the opposite. That is I wouldn't say necessarily opposite, but that's the fragmentation. That's where the real fragmentation, or at least how the fragmentation, the way I understand it, is constituted. It's this whole belief that I'm the only one in this world with this understanding. You must speak the way I communicate. If you don't, either I'll kill you or you're not part of my world. Fuck you. You know, so that kind of thing. That's why we call it ignorance. Okay? It's not tied to others. Compassion ties us all. This is what real, understanding diversity and accepting it for what it is. That's where real compassion is. That's where real unity comes in. We think that uniformity is only one thing. That's from the condition of having this whole belief that there's only one way to do something, one way to believe something, one person to believe in, one method to do, one method, all these things. It's all very, This is why I'm no longer against language learning. Even I'm not really for language acquisition completely, like not 100%, because it's still very robotic. The essence behind all of it is that one is another egoic thing versus another one that can be also egoic. So either way, when they're trying to fight each other, it's that polarity again, right? So whether it kind of ties into the previous video I made about language preservation, where if one is, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Had a big lunch. So if you had, sorry, what was I saying? If somebody could correct me later, that's fine. I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna jump into what I'm trying to say earlier. I'm kind of like Aaron Dowdy sometimes. I lose my train of thought, but that's fine. Okay, so going back to the whole thing, I've kind of digressed a little bit anyways. One, again, was being open, so getting out of your own way. Number two, trying to be sympathetic, or at the very least, empathetic towards others. Putting yourself in their shoes. Okay. The other is that once you start communicating, don't think of it as just teaching. Think of it as like you're communicating. That's what it is. To show them where you're at, especially if it's, whether it's them trying to pick up your language or you trying to pick up their language, or both, it goes both ways. Either way, it's still the same thing. You're communicating. So the key is to get them to understand. But again, the way to understand is to recognize that the way the brain recognizes understanding is deeper than just, I recognize those symbols. How the fuck are they going to recognize the sounds if they've never heard it in the first place? It's not their sound, and it's not their writing. In other words, symbols. So how are you going to get them to do that? Well, you find what can be perceived as commonality, or the common denominator, which is we all have, as any being, It's the physical. There's some people out there who will say like, oh, I don't agree with that. Good, then you don't agree with it. Stop watching the video. Simple as that. So, when someone is trying to understand you, you're trying to understand them, or both. Again, going back to the body. It's so simple, actually, right? You go back to the body. So what are those little things? What does your instinct tell you to do? Most of the time, it will tell you to use hand gestures, right? Exactly. Hand gestures. What's the other one? Images. And what's the other one? Sounds that are familiar through the body. Not familiar, like made up, like sounds that formulate words. Because that's part of symbolism. When you look at a word, a sound, let's say you hear a sound that goes, that could be a word. That could be a sentence. That could be whatever it is. The point it is communication. But how do we understand that sound formulated, made into that little concept? Like pretend it's like it means rock, or it means bird, it means skin. Right? It doesn't matter. Those are sounds being made because the brain understands symbolism that way. So, but what caused the understanding in the first place? It is through what's deeper, more primordial, and that's through the body, through the senses. We understand something because we see it as like something we can, like it's almost like ourselves. The more interactive something is, the more connected you feel through something, the more you have a relationship with what you're seeing, you're experiencing, touching, feeling, tasting, breathing, whatever. The more you have all of it, all of the whole body, all of it completely, the more you are connected, the more understanding becomes possible. Sure, a lot of people will be like, I don't get what you're saying, I don't know what you mean. Hone your intuition, hone your instincts, go into the body. And I'm not here to give you exact things, but from what I know, this is what I can't go further than I have to show you, more like in person. But there are several things you can do if you want to start teaching a language or communicating. Therefore, because when we're in it for self-serving reasons, like I want to be a teacher, you want to ask yourself, first of all, why do you want to teach language? Because you want to gain popularity, you want numbers, you want likes on your YouTube channel or Instagram or TikTok or whatever. You're looking for money, or money becomes a bonus, the numbers become a bonus, but your real intention is to create a more flow and bring presence and awakeness into the world. If that's your goal, great, because it is. We need to connect it back again to beingness. We need to connect it back to. It's all there. I don't have to explain it. I think one of the best lessons, and not just I think, I know that one of the best lessons a person can learn is to actually experience it. Loss of limb, yeah, that's how you'll gain something. Either you go one direction or the other direction. Either you completely become fucking bitter, or you completely become like compassionate person and elevate the world as it is. I prefer the latter because it means we're validating each other, we're becoming more compassionate, we're elevating. But again, like in the previous video I mentioned, you have to go back into the past, you have to go into any unhealed parts of yourself. It's never going to be completely healed. The point is, it's all about learning, right? But sometimes to move forward, you have to go backwards. So, the other thing is to keep it simple. Through the body. That's what I mean. So through the body. Gestures. Okay. your body language itself, intonation. I wouldn't say necessarily intonation, but like, you know, there's some things get shared between cultures. Like for example, like that's facial expression, but like when the tone goes up, naturally the subconscious will recognize as like either it's something to do with excitement, right? So it's a form of excitement or stimulus, and it's expression. But if it goes down, the human body, at least the human body, recognizes that going down, so towards gravity, towards the earth. So therefore it feels lower. It could be sadness, it could be a lack of energy, it could be acceptance, it could be submission, right? So either way, that's part of it too. So basically it's all part of body language. Okay. And visual cues as well. Draw pictures that are, if you have a board with you, not everyone has a board. So what you do is, that's why you see people when they communicate with newly discovered lands, like new people or new races, the old term races, they draw on the sand, right? If there's soil or there's sand beside you, the stereotype is sand, because usually it's like coming to a coast or something, with the exploration, all that stuff. If there's no sand, then you use another way. You use hand gestures, you point. But part of this also has to do with going back into that childlikeness I talked about in the previous video, and I'm mentioning it again here, and I'm going to say it again and 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 again, because it's really time to go back, but also time to move forward. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. So through the body. So for example, if they're saying, let's say, what's your name? And you just go, what's your name? You just go, what's your name? They're not going to fucking understand what that means. Especially if they've never studied it. Right? They're not going to know what that means. Let alone just the meaning of the words. What's your name? There's an easier way of doing that. You just go, I am da-da-da. You what? They will understand. The brain knows what to do. The fact that we belittle these things, the fact that we say that language learning is the only thing, is completely myopic and arrogant and ignorant of us to do, because it's like saying, well, there's no other way or form of communication. So, through the body, hand gestures, facial expressions, intonation, examples. If you have a whiteboard with you, by all means, use that. If you have a cell phone with you, look up pictures and you show that picture. It's really simple. So, actually that's the fourth one, visual aids. Visual aids is kind of similar to the gestures and all that stuff, but visual aids is more like, possibly like drawing, but they're kind of tied together. Right, so basically anything with the visual. Why the eyes? Because that's our point of perception. That's the first, astrologically speaking, that's Mercury. So sight, right, we see that. But through the sight comes understanding that it's a direct connection between sight and the subconscious going like, ding, 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 they recognize that image. When I talked to one of my people I was helping from Canada, I explained to him, he's like, oh, he recognizes the symbol. So it's a symbol, right? But if someone has never learned about the symbol, what it means, what's the most automatic thing they can think of? The brain recognizes this color. Not because it's black, not because it's a name black. It recognizes it as something dark. It recognizes something light. So if you just went black, white, some cultures might understand that, or most cultures today would. But that's not the point, whether it's majority or minority. That's not the point. This isn't about the numbers. The point is the recognition of the subconscious, the recognition of the primordial self, this physical. That's what it recognizes. It just understands that it's like, it just knows that it's like light, dark. Simple as that. So going back to the whole, when you're asking yourself, what's your name? my name and da-da-da, and the brain will register that as something like, okay. But the other thing to do is also to allow for opportunity. Okay, allow for opportunity. What I mean by this is, you can't just be like, I've done my job and that's it. If you believe that this is your thing, as like you've done your job, then you haven't done your job at all, because you just think it's a job. It's a means to an end. Who the fuck benefits from means to an end? So that means that if you go into your 9-to-5 job, you're doing it for money. Is there a greater cause? Is there a greater purpose behind that? If it's just your cause is just to earn money, then you're not going to enjoy your job. You're going to end up depressed. You're going to end up not hating job. You're going to end up hating yourself. You see what I mean? Yeah. Even if you deny it to yourself, like, I don't know, you become numb to it. Sooner or later, people are going to get tired of being numb. Okay? It actually goes in the other way, in the other direction. Being numb is, for me, it feels like it's kind of like the cousin of apathy. So, allowing for opportunity means that when we come across someone, just like we're communicating, right? All that stuff. Again, whether or not they learn when they're picking up your language or you're picking up theirs, or both. It's about the transmission of energy, of communication, this whole thing. Can you see that? There seems to be a fucking limit of this camera. So there's that. Okay, so allow for opportunity. So for example, hang out with them. Make friends. That's part of opportunity. Making friends. So Jupiter, making friends. Traveling. But yeah, so basically allow for opportunity. Allow for, when the opportunity arises, go for it. Right? So, but going deeper into how you explain yourself using gestures is, let's say you have this conversation now, or not necessarily a conversation, you're just communicating. This isn't about trying to speak the other person's language right away. This is about sharing. This is one of the things I would love to still happen, where you come across someone you've never come across their language before, and all of a sudden they're speaking their language, but they're using all these gestures, and you're doing the same thing, and with the hand gestures, body language, all that stuff, and you're just enjoying each other's company, because for some reason there's this sort of intuition and instinct that tells you, cool, I'm connecting with this person. You know what that does? It creates a bond. You know what creates bonds? Transmission. Astrologically speaking, this is Venus, similar to Mercury. Both are transmission. Both are like connection. Here, A to B, B to A. Okay, there's that flow. When we have a connection, we create that energetic bond as well. There's just sort of a knowing of trust. We start to like them. They start to like you. That in itself will make them open to exploring, what else do you have to share with me? Because that's really what communication is, right? It's sharing. But it's more like the transmission of experience. Not plain information, experience. So let's say you hang out with them, right? And then they say something, and you're like, I don't know what that is, but they show their hand gesture, and then you sort of have this feeling that it means like, how are you? If you say how are you to them, they also don't get, what's the best way? Most people will say you're gonna break it down to how are you. That doesn't work that way. Understanding doesn't work that way. How are you is not, the breakdown of that is a linguistic, mathematical, structural breakdown. But that's all it is. Understanding sees the whole thing. Because the intention of how are you is asking about them. You're connecting to them. How are you? How are you feeling? But usually don't ask that question. Usually we ask one of the first questions we ask, or the greetings we have, is how are you? However, but the intention is very similar between cultures. how are you is the intention of asking about them. It's an interest, it's an investment in the other person, and likewise, vice versa as well. Right? It's connection. That's all it is. So we don't even need to do anything. We just say, how are you? And then we support it with good or bad. For some cultures, this is a bad thing. Some cultures, this is probably a bad thing. So you either also use this one. What you have to think outside the box and feel, instead of just gestures itself, think of like, what am I truly trying to communicate to that person? What am I trying to get them to understand? And usually we're kind of limited by our own cultures, right? Because one culture's way of communication may not be the same in another culture, especially if it's like hand gesture like this one. This is bad for some cultures. So, right? So instead of doing that, you can do other things like, if they get offended, then you just say like, that's actually also an opportunity for you to show them how you apologize. And then eventually, if you keep making mistakes, and that's the good thing about mistakes, is that they learn that you're saying sorry eventually. And then they pick up on that's how you say it. And they also pick up on the sound of what you're saying. Those formulated words in your own language, that's how it is. That's how the subconscious, that's how the primordial self itself absorbs experience. It absorbs that sort of information. It's a transmission. It absorbs it because it understands it to what it understands. So that's one thing, right? So allowing for opportunity also means that you are, what do you call this? You allow yourself to see beyond what you already perceive. Meaning you allow yourself to use your imagination and go like, okay, well, they don't understand what I'm saying. Be okay with that. They don't get what I'm saying. They just go like, okay, hey, let's walk over there. Let's go over here. Let's go do this, right? And sometimes when people do this, eventually, at first impression, if their culture doesn't have this gesture, what are they going to do? They're just going to look at you. But then what else can you do? Do you just keep doing this and insist that that's the only way? No. You usually grab their hand and you go, come with me. And eventually, if that keeps happening again and again in certain situations, not because you intentionally intended to repeat and repeat, but because it's part of communication, body language, then they'll pick it up. They'll be like, oh, that's what he's saying, come with me. Boom, right there, the intention of the come with me. It's not breaking it down into sentences, and little fragments, little like, it's what do you call that? The nominal, whatever, in linguistics they have this. It's part of morphology, I believe, right? It's one thing to have that. It's another thing to really understand the intention behind it. Why do you think there's miscommunication when a person says, what? Versus, what? Or versus, what? Versus, what? You see what I mean? It is not about the word. It is not about the phrases, not about the sentences, not about the vocab, not about the grammar, not about any of that shit. It's about communication. That is communication right there. Because you're sensing it. It's intuitive, it's instinctive. Or more. Okay? I don't know yet, but I'm going from my experience that this is what works for me. So now go into other concepts, like for example, if you're saying, how are you? And you say good, bad, whatever, and you use different symbols if you have to adjust. You adjust accordingly. You adapt, right? What happens is that the more complex it gets, the more you're going to use other things that probably they already recognize. For example, they said, if you ask them like, it's easy to say, okay, this is my house. This is my partner. This is my car. The hand gesture right there is already saying this is. Eventually they're going to pick up, again, not in one sitting, okay, that's not the way it works, okay, evolution doesn't work that way, adaptation doesn't work that way, evolution doesn't work that way. It's a gradual process. The fact that we have this panaceic Panacean, whatever sort of mindset is what causing a lot of the impatience and destruction and the whole like, I just want it now, 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 now. It's a very unhealthy ego. Instant gratification, IG, right? Instant gratification. What has that ever done? When you're sick and tired of it, you'll see. For those who aren't, I'll probably see you later. So, going back to the whole, if they're saying, okay, this is my car, this is my house, that's fine. But once they start to get things, like for example, this is my car I bought yesterday. I bought it yesterday, and then you can show them money I bought, boom, yesterday, right? Sometimes there are cases where there's a little bit of breaking down that might take place, like for example, yesterday. What if you heard this just yesterday? What if they don't recognize it? And even if they recognize it, you come across another concept and you said long time ago versus yesterday. But I thought, then later, then you explain, oh, yesterday, so today, then you show them what? Maybe something like a picture of a calendar. Or you show them like, if they're not familiar with calendars, then you show them like the moon. Today is, that you have, patience is something that you also practice. It isn't just something you cultivate. It's something you practice as well. That's also part of being, allowing for opportunity. Because now you're going outside of your comfort zone and be like, okay. So you go with that. Right? Go with the feeling. Go with the feeling. It won't, even if you get it wrong, you're most likely going to get it wrong if you force things, like through just thought. Even though you get it right, there's not going to be any absorption. They're just going to know, like, I just know the information. I just know the definition. Most of the time is wasted when you're trying to explain to them something. They don't even know how to absorb it. They haven't even absorbed it yet. People think absorption has a lot to do with I just get information and then I think I just remembered it. Then 3 days later, what happens? You forget it. Oh, I have notes. Then you do it again. And you do it again. And you do it again. You know how much time gets wasted by regurgitating things? A lot of time. I wasted about a good 8 years of university studying and learning language. That's just, my experience. That's my experience. People like to chuck this to also like the whole, to each his own. Yes, to each his own, because we all have unique energies. We all have unique, our direct. But how we go about it is slightly different from another person, or at least it is actually different. That's that part. But our source is that the fact that you, for example, have hunger and I have hunger. What does that say? You're saying your hunger is different from my hunger? Well, what you're hungry for might be different. How often you're hungry might be different. But the fact that you still have hunger shows that there's that commonality. There's the other thing. We all have this ability to acquire. We all have this ability to understand through these natural primordial functions. Because we recognize these things. We recognize images that we're familiar with. From what I know up to this point, symbols or abstract images or abstract symbols are basically a representation of something that's concrete or more or less concrete, like a number, like 2 for example. That's a symbolism of this, right? But what does this mean? What the brain really understands is not the shape of your fingers, that this is 2. What your brain really picks up, the subconscious that is that there's 1, 2. But the brain is still not going to get it unless if you just show him 1, 2. You have to compare 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you go back and forth. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So what does that mean? Well, it's not about the numbers themselves. It's not about the words that created those numbers or that are correlated with those numbers. It's the fact that the brain understands that there's some sort of pattern going on. It recognizes a pattern. And it recognizes that when there's repetition, yes, there's a pattern, but what that does, it goes to the conscious part of the brain, which is, it just recognizes the pattern. But for it to be understood, the brain, subconscious area of the brain, needs to connect. That's why it's through the body. It ties into why trauma work is going back to the emotions, because emotions are the physical expressions of the trauma through the perception of the brain, of the conscious, going, but it gets lodged into the subconscious area if it's trauma, because it's emotion based. But that's one side of it. The other side of it is that emotions allow for retention, absorption, even further than that. Symbolized by the water, the water element. Astrologically speaking or esoterically speaking, it's represented by water. But water actually is not even represented only by water. Water behaves that way. It remembers, because if you think about just like antibacterial soap or like those hand sanitizers, the reason they say that any sort of alcohol cannot be 99% is because if you dilute it, what happens is water acts as this it has sticky properties to it. Water does that. So water, being that it is, and where majority of it is, our bodies is water, there's a connection between that and the memory itself. I don't know the exact science behind it, but the best I can do is show you that from my experience, it works. Soll ich auf Deutsch reden oder alles erklären? Ich kann vielleicht nicht so viel oder nicht viel Fließendheit. Ich habe vielleicht so, ja, aber wenn ich auf Deutsch sprechen, ja, ich benutze aber mein Bewusstsein oder das Teil hier des Gehirns. Also siehst du, ja? Seht ihr, dass ich nicht so viel, ich kann nicht so gut auf Deutsch sprechen, aber das geht nicht um die sogenannten Fließendheit. Das geht nicht um darum, was ich sage, sondern geht es um die tiefe Perspektive, die tiefe Dinge, die wir in unserer Unbewusstheit, in unserem Bewusstsein existiert. Also ja, okay, ich bin nicht so fließend, wenn ich auf Deutsch spreche, weil ich so, was ich sage, muss ich daran denken. Ja, okay, grammatische Fehler, okay, Fehler. Yeah, so what I did there was trying to show you that when I'm even trying to speak in German, there's some fluency there, but fluency is a spectrum. It actually expands, just like opportunity does. It's so Jupiter, right? So it expands. So we cannot put it in a box and say, even native speakers, like say, oh, you must be a native speaker, you must be C2. Where the fuck does that come from? I'm not against the labels, those work with the structures, but structures can only go so far. There's a reason for structures. So, like right now, it gives you the structure to kind of give you these guidelines. Well, once you start relying on even the structures that I just gave you right now, this whole video, you're gonna get lost. Instead of just like, allowing yourself to be that whole thing, being open, sympathetic or empathetic, going through the body, visual aids, allowing for opportunity. Okay. So those are the 4 to 5 main things that I would say. There's something else, there's more. I'll probably make a video of that one, but the video has gone quite long and I just don't want a video that's way too long. So I hope that helps. There's other ways to do the whole thing, like I don't have examples of for myself. I'm gonna see if I can upload a video of when I was helping a friend of mine earlier. I have a record of him when we spoke for the first time and how much improvement he's made after a few months of talking. I think I still have those videos. I'm sure I'll find it somewhere, but I'll post on that one. So yeah, so I hope this gives you some sort of helpful information that you can be a teacher. I'll probably post some more things on this one. So yeah, you can be a teacher. You can, when I say teacher, you can be this catalyst for change, or rather revitalization of communication. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.